21. The daily word for today is patience. And the affirmation is, I am patient with others as they grow. And the scripture is from Romans chapter 8, verse 25. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. And the daily word reading says, it takes patience to plant a seed and wait for signs of life to spring through the soil, and still longer for the bloom to grow into fullness. Through it all, I do my part to encourage its growth. I provide water and sunshine and protect it from destructive elements that might harm the tender seedling. As it grows, I have faith it is evolving exactly as it should, unfolding in an orderly pattern. I remember this as I support others as they grow. This may be overcoming a challenge or moving toward a goal. Either way, I resist the urge to push them in the direction I think they should go or rush their development. I know they are listening to the call of their hearts and their inner voices. I am patient and kind as I offer my support and my love. And so again, the daily word for today is patience. And the affirmation is, I am patient with others as they grow. And so let us just take a moment with that daily word and let us tap into that depth of patience that we have within us, that hallmark of a leader to nurture and encourage others to grow at their own best and perfect pace. And to remember that patience is not gritting our teeth, but waiting upon the Lord. And knowing that as we wait, as we are patient, God in the midst of us is faith. God in the midst of us is strength. God in the midst of us is wisdom. We breathe deeply, allowing ourselves to release and let go of any cares or worries or concerns that may have crept into our minds, our bodies, our spirits in this time. For any concern that we may hold, we affirm patience. For any celebrations we hold, we give thanks. We know that power and presence of God goes before us, beside us, with us, and within us. And we are truly grateful as we prepare for our next session to tap into that well of wisdom, to open our minds, to open our hearts, and to know that we are being transformed in rich and wondrous ways, and to know and hold this together. We are truly grateful. And we say, Amen. So it's a delight to welcome you back for our second session for our UMMAS leadership time together. As we discovered this morning, there are all kinds of ethical questions and considerations that we can be aware of. But there's also ways, as Reverend Charlene was talking about, to open ourselves within our communities to those who are not exactly like us, and to stay open to our learning. And as we prepare for Linda and Gabrielle to share with us their session, Understanding and Interacting Respectfully with Gender Diverse Children, Youth, and Adults, it's a moment to remember that daily word of patience, that while we're learning, we give ourselves space to get new words in our mouth, to get new understanding in our minds, to get new clarity about how we want to be with those in our congregation and those we want to welcome. And we can think about that one of the things that's coming through in a lot of the ministry literature, and let me say that can include whatever clergy across denominations there are, is that we are called in so many ways to extend ourselves and extend our arms to welcome those who want to have that awesome experience and that presence of God in the midst of them. And what a gift that we have to give to others. You know, we say in our teachings there's only one presence and one power in the universe and in our lives, and that each and every one is created in that image and likeness of God. And I think that we as true students have a wonderful gift to give to those who may, in their initial growing up, in their previous spiritual or religious experience, to hear that and know that however they are choosing to express and to be, that they are God's beloved. And that we can be patient with ourselves and with one another as we continually open our eyes in this time that is showing us so many different expressions of the need for wisdom and understanding, and especially for that loving presence that we know is the Christ of us. So I invite you to get comfortable and to prepare yourselves to think about, how will I be patient with myself as I learn and grow? How will I be patient with others as they learn and grow? And as leaders, how will we together bring forth that wondrous expression that is the presence of God we each are here to share? And so without further ado, I am so delighted to welcome Gabrielle Claiborne and Linda Hertzer.
Thank you, Reverend Jen, for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure that you had a great lunch and that you're ready to do some learning here with us. My name is Gabrielle Claiborne, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a transgender woman, and I am one of the co-founders. Linda is the other co-founder of Transformation Journeys Worldwide. We're an inclusion, training, and consulting firm with a transgender focus. So we help a myriad of organizations, much like Unity, on their journey of transforming their environments into fully inclusive cultures for transgender, non-conforming, and non-binary individuals. And you're going to learn a little bit more about those terms here in just a minute.
Next slide, please.
But before we get started, I wanted to go over just a few housekeeping items.
It's always, the challenge getting all the technology set up at the first. There we go. Thank you.
We want to make sure, and I think we do, that everybody has something to write with and on, because we're going to invite you to participate in a brief handwriting exercise with us in just a few minutes. It's not necessary to take a lot of notes because we're going to be sharing a PDF of today's presentation with you afterwards for a future resource. And then for those who are joining in via Facebook, we want to make sure that you are engaged in this conversation as well virtually. So please indicate your comments or questions in the chat box, and we will make sure that we get to as many of those as we can. Also, this is a safe space, okay? So we really want to invite you to engage in this conversation with us. There is not a question that you can't ask that this lady right here hasn't already asked me, okay? So we want to invite you to lean in and get comfortable. Are we good with that? Yeah. Great, all right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Herzer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am not transgender. So that's why I have asked so many questions. Now, when people learn that I'm not transgender, I'm often asked, so Linda, how did you get involved in transgender inclusion training? And I especially get that question after people learn that I am also an ordained minister. And you may recognize that sanctuary. That is Unity Savannah. Several years ago, Dale Worley had us down there to do the Sunday morning talk. Yeah! A shout out to Dale, right? And everybody from Unity Savannah. We went there several years after I had come onto the staff of a church here in Atlanta, where about 10% of our congregants identified somewhere under the transgender umbrella. And back then, I did not know anything about people who were trans or cross-dressed or who were genderqueer or non-binary. I didn't know anything about any of that. So I began reading and researching and sitting down with my congregants and just listening to their stories. Gabrielle happened to be one of those congregants. And in 2015, when I left that position, I wrote a book based on all I had learned over those 3 years on what the Bible has to say in support of gender diverse people. And Gabrielle and I co-founded Transformation Journeys Worldwide. Now, I have a confession to make. Back when I first started at that church, I actually felt uncomfortable around my trans congregants because they just didn't fit any of the mental categories that I had for gender. I had always thought that one's gender was determined by their anatomy. That's what I had grown up believing, and I'm guessing that may be what many of us grew up believing. Let's see if my guess is right. How many of you grew up believing that gender is determined by one's anatomy? Yeah, that is the common cultural assumption here in the U.S. and actually in many countries. But what I learned from reading what many medical and mental health experts had to say was that my understanding of gender was actually very outdated. What the medical and mental health experts have learned is that all of us as human beings have something that is even stronger than our biology when it comes to determining our gender. And that something is our gender identity.
Gender identity being defined by that which we know, everyone in the room today and online, who we are on the inside, whether that's male, female, perhaps a combination of both, or maybe neither. And because this concept of gender identity is so foundational to today's conversation, we want to make sure that you walk away with this definition. And research shows that the best way to learn something is to manually write it down. So we want to ask you to find that piece of paper and pen that we ask you to set aside at the beginning of our time together today and manually write this definition. But, everybody, right here, we want you to use your non-dominant hand. So take a moment and use your non-dominant hand and write this definition.
And all of you who are joining in virtually, please do the same thing.
And we're grading penmanship, by the way. Okay, everybody right here. So the good thing about this exercise is we're not asking you to complete it, because if you're anything like Lynn and I, we'd be here for a while, okay? But we do want to ask you, as you were writing that definition, what came up for you? How were you feeling when you were writing that definition? And if you want to just shout out a 1 or 2 word experience or feeling, that would be great. Anybody? Awkward. Awkward. Didn't fit in. Thank you. Okay, I like that answer. Okay.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Difficult.
Difficult. Yeah, great. So are we seeing anything come through, Chris, on our virtual folks?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So thank you for engaging in that exercise with us, because another reason we wanted you to do that is because it gives you just a glimpse of what trans people experience when our gender identities do not match the sex that we were assigned at birth.
So take just a moment and really sink into those feelings of awkwardness, hard, difficult, artistic, that worked well, that you just had. Because those are the feelings times by about 100 that compel transgender people, non-binary people, to try to align their external and public lives with their internal knowing of who they are.
So by definition, transgender describes individuals like myself whose gender identities do not match the sex that we were assigned at birth. And just to give you some context of the origin of this word, trans is a Latin prefix for across. So trans people's gender identities are across from the sex that they were assigned at birth.
Conversely, the word cisgender describes people like me, and perhaps like many of us, folks for whom our gender identities always have matched the gender that we were assigned at birth. So we're probably like that fish in water that didn't know it's wet. We've been swimming around in a gender that always matched our gender identity, so we probably have never even had to think about our gender identity. And to continue that etymology lesson, cis is a Latin prefix for on the same side as. So cisgender people, our gender identities are on the same side as the sex that we were assigned at birth.
Non-binary describes individuals whose gender identities are neither male nor female, or perhaps a combination of both.
Now, when I was first trying to wrap my head around all of this, it was a lot to take in. But fortunately, at that time, someone shared with me a diagram that clearly showed the more up-to-date understanding of gender that medical and mental health professionals throughout the world now have. And it was this diagram of the genderbread person. And what is so great about this diagram is that it shows the 4 very different aspects of gender that all of us as human beings have. And it's also helpful because it indicates that each of those aspects of gender exist on continuums. So what makes each one of us unique as a human being is where any one of us falls on any one of these four very different continuums.
And when we look at this first aspect of gender, our gender identity, again, this is who we know, indicated by the genderbread person's brain, who we are on the inside. When we look at this continuum just a little closer, we actually see that trans women and cis women are on one end, trans men and cis men are on the other. It's non-binary individuals that identify as neither male nor female or a combination of both that fall somewhere in the middle or on the outside of this continuum. And these are the individuals that are really pushing our culture's understanding of the expansiveness of gender.
So here's another graphic of what gender identity is about. Like we've said, all of us as human beings have one. There are cisgender identities, man and woman. Now, some people still believe that these are the only two gender identities, and that belief, that cultural assumption, is known as the gender binary. But as you can see, there are also a wide array of transgender gender identities.
And when we look at this overarching trans umbrella just a little closer, we actually see that there's two sub-umbrellas underneath it, a binary umbrella and a non-binary umbrella. Under the binary umbrella are those individuals that identify as trans in its specific sense, so trans women or trans men.
And then, as you can see, there are also a wide array of non-binary gender identities. And non-binary people are actually the most rapidly growing demographic under the trans umbrella, as indicated by a 2017 Harris poll that said that 10% of millennials identified as some form of non-binary, with an additional 2% of respondents identifying as trans men or as trans women. And then just last month, the Williams Institute released a report showing their estimates that 1.2 million Americans now identify as some form of non-binary. So to give you a chance to meet some non-binary folks very briefly, we wanted to share a short excerpt with you from a CBS News documentary on non-binary people.
There's a certain palatable transgender person who has been put forth in the media. Transgender doesn't look just like one thing.
There is more than just boys, girls, men, women. There could be people who live in the spaces between that.
In the 70s and the 80s, we didn't have language for that. We just kind of got lost.
I identify as agender.
I identify as gender fluid.
I identify as genderqueer. The older I get, the more I just identify with being non-binary.
I feel like I've been running from gender all my life, and like this is as far away as I can get.
People think that the word transgender just means, oh, switching genders or transforming. It's much more than that.
There are men and there are women. I am neither of those things.
We're in its
So along with our gender identities, all of us also have a gender expression. And gender expression has to do with how we express or present our gender on the outside, as indicated by that dotted line going around the outside of the genderbread person. And so I'm going to want you to think and call out some answers here. What are some of the ways that we express or present our gender, on the outside? I'll get you started. Our hairstyles are certainly one way. What would be another way? Jewelry, clothing,
Clothes,
shoes, yep. Makeup. The actions,
Yes.
mannerisms, definitely.
Yeah.
The accessories we carry or wear, and also, here's a really big one, especially for trans people, are vocal registers. And we'll explain a little bit more about that in a little bit.
So as you can see on this continuum of gender expression, an individual can have anything from a very feminine gender expression to a very masculine gender expression. But there are individuals that fall somewhere in the middle of this continuum that are considered as gender nonconforming. And so the definition of gender nonconforming describes people whose gender expressions and behaviors differ from cultural expectations regarding their gender. And because there are subtle nuances to what it means to be trans, gender nonconforming, or non-binary, there are acronyms that have actually emerged to describe the complexity of the gender diverse community. One of the acronyms is TGNC. That represents trans and gender nonconforming. An acronym that is beginning to emerge even as recent as a couple of months ago is TGNCMB. This is trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary.
Now, a third aspect of gender that we all have is our biological sex.
Now, culture tells us that this is a cut and dry issue. We either have male or female, and that's it. In fact, intersex individuals challenge that assumption. But before we get to intersex, I just want to point out one thing. What we can see here from the genderbread person is that while sex is determined between the legs, gender is determined between the ears. So biological sex and gender identity are completely different continuums.
So how many of you have ever heard of the word intersex before? Okay. Some have, some haven't, and that's typically what we see in our audiences. So we do usually explain it a bit. The word intersex describes a person for whom the biological components of sex, that is, internal and external reproductive organs, chromosome patterns, and also hormone levels, show up in ways that are not typically male or female. And so on this diagram here, you can see in the first two columns what most of us probably learned in 9th grade biology about how people show up, right? But what our biology teachers probably didn't mention was that there are more than just male and female ways that people are embodied. People are also embodied as intersex. In fact, there are over a dozen, that's what that 12 plus besides intersex stands for, over a dozen different combinations of the biological components of sex that can result in someone being intersex.
So a fourth aspect of gender is our sexual orientation. And as you may be familiar with, this is who we're attracted to romantically, physically, and emotionally, indicated by the genderbread person's heart. When understanding sexual orientation for trans people, our sexual orientation is always defined from the perspective of our gender identity. So I identify as a trans woman. I'm attracted to men. So that would make my sexual orientation straight. Thank you. Very good.
Okay. So another thing that is, as you can see from the genderbread person, gender is a whole lot more complex than probably most of us grew up knowing about. And another thing that's really helpful about this diagram is that it helps to dispel a common myth that exists in our culture, and that is one that has to do with the acronym LGBT. Seeing those 4 letters all together all the time leads many people to believe that being lesbian, gay, and bisexual is the same thing as being transgender. But of course, what we've just learned from the genderbread person is that being lesbian, gay, or bisexual has to do with one's sexual orientation. Excellent. Whereas being transgender is all about and only about one's. Exactly.
Stated a little differently, being lesbian, gay, or bisexual is about who you go to bed with. Whereas transgender, being transgender, is about who you go to bed as. I see some ahas out there.
Yeah, and that's, I have to tell you, that's what I felt the first time I heard that. Oh, now it makes sense.
So growing up in a culture that believes that our gender is determined by our anatomy, makes it difficult for trans people to understand and accept what has been going on inside of us. That's why many of us have not come out until later in life, although most of us have known since a very young child that there was something different about us. Take me, for example. At the age of 8, I had a born-again experience which began my rich, lifelong relationship with God. At the age of 9, I began having this unusual desire to dress in women's clothes. When no one was home, I would secretly slip into my mom's closet and I would try on her clothes. For some reason, I felt at peace when I did this, but for the life of me, I couldn't understand why. I also didn't understand why I didn't want to just play Barbies. I wanted to be Barbie. And now I am. Now, because I grew up in a very conservative environment, my daddy is a Pentecostal preacher. And because this was long before the days of the internet, just how long, I don't care to disclose to you today, I lived the next 35 years of my life in a place of constant unrest, burdened by fear and confusion. In public, I learned to mask my feminine desires by being a good student, a talented athlete, a good Christian, a popular guy. After graduating from Emory University and then pursuing a civil engineering degree from Georgia Tech, I then married a beautiful woman and we had 3 amazing kids. I had a very successful career owning multiple businesses in a construction industry and a very nice 6-figure income. To top it all off, I was a leader in a large, prestigious Atlanta church where I led a men's Bible study group, I served as an elder, and I was a soloist in our world-class choir. By all outward appearances, I had it all. But in reality, I was living a life of turmoil because of this internal gender dilemma, which I still had no words to describe. But when I was 45 years old, I accidentally stumbled across a website showing pictures of trans women. Well, when I saw these images, this was the first time that I'd seen any of these images, but when I saw these images, immediately I thought, that's me. So I spent the next 5 years doing online research, living between the exhilaration of knowing that's me and the despair of thinking, I can never live my life as a woman. What would God think? What would my family think? But after 5 years of living in this intense turmoil, I finally decided to get help. It was then in my online research, I found a woman by the name of Ramona who actually made a living dressing biological males as women. Now, this just goes to show you that you can find anything on the internet if you're looking for it. Well, I finally mustered the courage to call and make an appointment with Ramona. And on the day of the appointment, as I'm driving to her home, I was just a hot mess. But as soon as Ramona greeted me at the door and ushered me upstairs her dressing salon, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. You see, her salon was rooms of dresses and shoes, and I love shoes, and wigs and jewelry and drawers of lingerie, and that's where we started. The first thing Ramona did was she held up a pair of padded pants and said, Gabrielle, here's your butt. I said, my butt? I've got a butt. She said, girl, I'm trying to create this feminine silhouette on you. I said, give me that butt. Well, after she got me all padded and dressed, she sat me down in her salon chair and started applying the makeup and a wig, things that I had never done for myself before. Now, all this time that she was doing my makeup and my hair, she was standing between me and the mirror, so I wasn't able to see the transformation that was taking place. When she was done, she looked at me and she says, Gabrielle, are you ready? With my heart beating wildly, I said, I think so. It was at that moment, Ramona stepped away from the mirror, and there, for the very first time, I saw myself on the outside as the person I knew I was on the inside. I was 49 years old, and I don't want to see anybody here doing math in your head, and meeting myself for the very first time. It was then I knew, that's me. Well, as you can imagine, that was a very emotional experience for me, and I began to cry. Ramona quickly caught me. She says, no, Gabrielle, Girl 101. If you're crying before I put the makeup on you, not afterwards. Several months later, I knew I needed to explore this fully to see where this would take me. So over the next 2 years, I lived back and forth between my male persona and my true female identity, going to work dressed as a man each day, becoming home and living as Gabrielle in the evenings and on the weekends. It was during this time that a friend of mine told me about a trans-affirming congregation here in Atlanta. Well, despite the fears of what people would think, but more importantly, what God would think, I mustered the courage to attend an Easter morning service there. And I'm glad to say that decision changed my life. You see, although I didn't hear anything new that morning, I felt something new. I finally felt the born-again joy of connecting with my Creator as my true self, internally and externally aligned. But it wasn't just this experience of joy that was meaningful for me that day. It was also the pastor's warm welcome, because at the end of the service, as I was trying to duck out, he caught me at the back door and said how nice it was to see me, and he actually encouraged me to come back. Now I have to confess, I had to pinch myself at this point just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Well, over the next couple of years, I was invited to bring my gifts of ministry to this church. I joined the choir, which I ended up directing. I started a trans support group, and I was elected to serve on the executive board there. It was during this time that I made the decision to finally embrace my truth and to live full-time as the trans woman that I knew myself to be. But this meant finding some way to earn an income as a trans woman, a 6'3" plus 5 inches trans woman. And that scared me. Well, fearing that I would not be welcomed back into the workplace by my construction colleagues, I fell back on my entrepreneurial experience and started a cleaning company and a home renovation company. And almost 7 years ago now, Lynn and I co-founded Transformation Journeys Worldwide. So while I've been very fortunate vocationally, having been able to start several thriving businesses as a trans woman, I am also grateful that some of my family have chosen to take this journey with me. And what a journey it has been for all of us. The very first family member that I came out to was my youngest daughter. And fortunately for me, she has been supportive and accepting of my true gender identity. My ex-wife, oldest daughter, and son have had greater challenges with their journeys around my transition, but over time are starting to make peace with it in their own ways. Unfortunately, my sister and parents have chosen not to have any contact with me since I came out in 2010. Yet I continue to hold space for them in hopes that their hearts will soften and that they would want to reconnect with me again. So while my journey hasn't been easy, and I know my loved ones have experienced many challenges with it, I now know that I'm happier and more whole than I've ever been. And I'm grateful to God to finally be realizing the internal and external alignment that I've needed and wanted in my life for so long. And thankful that I get to live my life out loud each day as a celebration of God's love for me and helping create a world that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for sharing your story and mostly for having the courage to live that story. Now, as someone who's been Gabrielle's best friend for about 9 years, I know that that's only the tip of the iceberg. And just last year, Gabrielle published her memoir, which is actually more of a memoir meets self-help book, because in it she talks about ways that all of us can embrace our truth and the lessons she learned, the universal lessons she learned along the way. And that book and my book are both available for sale, and we'll be happy to sign them. They'll be for sale during the break, and we'll sign them, and after too, and we'll sign after our session together today. Now, we know that we have just dumped a whole lot of terms and definitions that might be rather unfamiliar to you, out there. And so we're going to pause here for a little bit of Q&A. But before we do that, we do want to make sure that as you ask your questions, that you're practicing using the word transgender, which has evolved in how it's used respectfully, in the most respectful way.
So today, the most respectful way to use this word is as an adjective. So for you grammarians in the audience and online, you know an adjective describes. You have to have something after it. So you wouldn't say, I have friends who are transgenders, nor would you say, I have a transgendered congregate.
And likewise, you're not going to want to be talking with someone later today or this week and say, wow, I learned about transgender at the UMass conference. No, you'd say, I learned about transgender people or the transgender community. So that's the grammar lesson for today. So now on to Q&A, especially if you would like clarification or a little further explanation of any of these terms and definitions which we've just shared.
So if you're in the room, we have a mic here. If you could come up to the mic is off camera, so you don't have to worry about being on camera. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, please enter your questions or comments in the chat box, and we will have someone read those out for the group. So, who wants to be first? Please understand this is a safe space, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a little confused about the gender identity non-binary.
Okay.
I'm wondering how that relates to how society may have impacted your gender identity, if it's all in the mind, or are you being persuaded one way or the other to think of yourself as a certain gender identity?
Okay, great question. Linda, you want to take that?
Yeah, so that question about, I hear you asking maybe two things. Definitely one about the non-binary and kind of what's that about. And also, how much, I think I heard you say, how much does our culture's expectations around gender impact what people think about themselves? Is that second part true? All right, then I'd like to start by addressing that second part first. When it comes to, because I had that same question, it's kind of like, well, in fact, I remember asking Gabrielle, couldn't you have just been like, instead of being a really, He-Man masculine kind of, or even toxic, we hear about toxic masculinity. Instead of being a real, couldn't you have just been a gentle man, a kind man, maybe like amplified your feminine, because we all have that feminine masculine energy, right? Couldn't you have just amplified that a bit? And I remember Gabrielle saying, no, that wasn't it. And then when I started hearing the stories of trans men, that really brought that home to me, because many trans men, before they transitioned and were out as trans men, were lesbians and lived as how they would refer to themselves as butch lesbians. So women who played very, their gender expression was very masculine. The roles they played in relationships were very masculine too. They were kind of like the husband in the couple. And I've read several memoirs and talked to a number of trans men, and what they said is that, we were doing this masculine thing, playing masculine roles, dressing very masculine, but that wasn't it. It wasn't about the roles we were playing. It wasn't about how we expressed ourselves. It was about who I knew myself to be. I was actually a man. I wasn't just a very masculine woman. I was a man. And that's when they transitioned as trans men. So to me, that was very important in regards to, no, it's not just culture's expectations around gender. It actually is one's internal knowing of who they are.
I will add something, that culture, remember we shared the term gender binary. that gender binary is a term that means that many people believe that there's only men and women, right? But culture does perpetuate this belief, this erroneous belief, that there are only men and women. Well, non-binary individuals are now emerging saying, no, there's a whole lot more than just men and women. So culture does enculturate us to believe that there are only two options for gender.
And when it comes to non-binary gender identities, again, I will say that those have been very challenging for me to understand because, again, you know, being raised on the gender binary, being raised on that belief that there's just, you know, men and women, I didn't have any categories for that. But again, as I started reading memoirs of non-binary people and just reading about their experiences, I think one of the most compelling ones for me was of a person who was assigned male at birth and lived as male for some time. And then that didn't feel right to them. So they actually transitioned. They took physical, legal, social means, we'll talk all about that in a bit, and to transition to as a woman and to live as a woman. But after they did that for a while, it's like, you know, this isn't quite it either. And that's why they now identify as non-binary, because they've lived as both. And I've read this story from a number of non-binary people. They've lived as both, and they realize, no, that's not who I am. And so my best suggestion for helping all of us understand non-binary people is to just start listening to their stories. And we'll give you a resource in just a minute for finding those stories.
So I want to add a couple more things to that, and that is a lot of folks, because it's hard to wrap your head around someone identifying as male or female or a combination of both or neither, a lot of folks feel like non-binary folks are confused. Well, I'm going to rest assure you, set that at ease, and dispel that myth right now. They are not confused. What's happened is that language has become more available, and now folks understand that because you can wrap language around a person's experience, their lived experience, that's why you have non-binary individuals who are coming out and coming up with all kind of terms. What we're sharing with you today is a overview framework. You know, a lot of times we encourage our audiences, if you meet someone that identifies as non-binary, you might want to say, so what does that mean for you? Because what that means for them may be a little different than the next person. So that's a great way to better understand, create that engagement, and also better understand how they identify.
We probably got time for one or two more questions.
We got one in the back.
We'll take Pam and then one coming in from online. Thank you. Yes.
So this is a little bit about terminology and kind of definition. Okay. So one of the terms under the non-binary is the term genderqueer. Mm-hmm. So when I was growing up, if someone was queer, that was a negative term for a man who was gay.
Right.
So I'm assuming that this genderqueer is not negative, and kind of what does it mean?
Great.
Good question. You're absolutely right. For many years in our culture, queer had a very negative, pejorative connotations. Yes. So, but now that word is being reclaimed by many people to identify themselves, but we strongly recommend that you not refer to someone as being queer unless they themselves have first identified themselves that way. And so while queer was originally used in terms of one's sexual orientation, when non-binary people first started sort of describing their experience, they actually used the term genderqueer because, you know, technically queer just means different, okay? So they knew their gender was different, so they used, before non-binary, there was the term genderqueer. Some people still use the word genderqueer to describe themselves, or they might use it in reference to their gender expression. So it can be used in a number of different ways.
So an individual could be describing their identity as somewhere outside of the typical boxes of man and woman, or outside of the typical boxes of masculine and feminine. We've got a question in the back, Chris.
Yes, one of our guests, Cassidy from Unity of Minneapolis, asks, what would you say is the biggest change a minister or congregation can make in using language or actions to increase inclusiveness in our communities?
Great question.
And we've got a whole section about that.
Yeah, we're going to ask that question. We're going to put that on the shelf. We're going to come back to that here in just a few minutes. Thank you for teeing up our next segment. We got another question right here.
Thank you for being here, and I think my question kind of fits into that. I have a beautiful non-binary grandchild, 9 years old.
Congratulations.
I know. I'm still working on the they. Their younger sister reminds me all the time, Grandma, it's they.
Right.
But what I'm learning, and being a minister of a church, is to really watch our language.
Yes.
That not men and women's groups, that not he and she, that not sister, brother, even the not mother, father, God, even though in Unity we see it as a it.
Yeah.
But to really, really be aware of genderizing our language, because it's everywhere. So.
Yes, absolutely. Great observation, great sense of awareness, and we are going to go there.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, one more?
This is just a quick clarification. One of our guests, Karen, is asking, I want to make sure I understand how to describe this correctly. A male to female is a transgender woman or a transgendered male?
So an individual who transitions from male to female is a transgender woman, and an individual that transitions from female to male is a transgender man. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes, okay? And just a side note, speaking of gender-neutral language, do you all know what tomorrow is? Tomorrow is National Parents' Day. So this is a great opportunity for you as spiritual leaders in your communities to highlight parents within your congregation who may not identify as the mother or the father, okay? For example, when I transitioned, a lot of folks don't even think about the things that we now have to navigate in my family, like how do we celebrate Father's Day now, right? So these are the kind of things that we want you all to be thinking about as we're having these conversations about how can we be more inclusive within our congregation so we can make sure that everyone feels like they're seen, they're heard, and that they belong, okay? So tomorrow's Parents' Day.
And we will have more Q&A as we continue on this afternoon. As to the question about, I mentioned a resource for learning more about non-binary people. A great resource for learning more about everything we're going to be talking about today is our website. Because we get so many questions, we know we can only share so much in 2 hours, right? We've created a resources page there that has 12 different categories of topics. This shows just 4 of them. So you can go to that resources page, learn more about these various definitions, how to use these terms respectfully. I've written a blog on, our website has a blog, and we've written a blog about gender-neutral language. So you can get some guidance there on that topic. But all of these things you can learn more about, plus finding links to our books there. So we definitely encourage you to make frequent use of the resources page. Under each of these 12 categories, you will find brief articles and brief videos that are from very reputable sources. So they are excellent sources of information. I used to be a librarian, so I know how to vet my sources.
So now we want to shift the conversation and talk about transitioning. Transitioning is the process of aligning one's external self in public life with one's internal gender identity. And there are 3 aspects to the transitioning process. There are social transitions, legal transitions, and physical or medical transitions. Now, when we talk about transitioning, it's important to understand that not all transgender, nonconforming, and non-binary individuals may elect to pursue all three aspects of transitioning. One, it may not be their personal story or personal journey, and two, they may not have the resources to pursue all three aspects.
But one aspect that everybody will pursue to some degree are what's called social transitions. And social transitions are very much what you heard about in Gabrielle's story. There is the dressing differently, so your gender expression is now aligned with your gender identity. And of course, once you're expressing differently out there in public, it's going to be very important that you use the restrooms that match your new gender expression for your safety and comfort and for that of everyone else. Also, many people will choose a new name and pronouns that match their gender identity. More about that in a few minutes. And then there is that whole coming out process. Not only coming out to your family and your friends, but coming out to your faith community and to, your auto mechanic and your hairdresser and your accountant and everybody that knows you, or to your kids' teacher, and the PTA parents or friends in the neighborhood. That coming out process in and of itself takes a lot of time, a lot of emotional energy, and some of these other things can also require some financial backing. Think about going from the picture on the left, right, to the picture on the right. Think of how much it would cost to get all the makeup, clothes, a whole new wardrobe for everything, for every season, for every occasion. It costs money, it takes time.
A new job.
Yeah.
Perhaps a new chosen family. Right. So we want to make sure that you understand your role that you're playing as a spiritual community for your gender diverse congregates. As you heard in my story, my spiritual community was my lifeline. They actually provided an opportunity and a safe space for me to try Gabrielle on before I actually was confident enough and assured enough that this was really me. So we wanted you to understand the width, breadth, and depth of what social transitions can look like with any of your gender diverse congregants, so that you can support them along the way and you can, build them up and be the wind beneath their wings. A second aspect of transitioning are legal transitions, and this usually starts with an individual legally changing their name. Some TGNC-MB individuals then may elect to pursue a gender marker change, and this is the M and the F that we know to be on our legal documents. I'm going to come back to the X and the U in just a minute. But when any combination of these changes, the legal name or the gender marker change, are made, then the balance of the documents that you see here on the screen can be modified to align with one's true gender identity and gender expression. So, as it relates to the X and the U gender marker, these are gender-neutral gender markers that non-binary and intersex individuals are using, or beginning to use. The U stands for unspecified. In fact, there are currently 20 U.S. states, and there's about to be one more added in the next month or two, and that is the state of New York, in addition to the District of Columbia, that allow their citizens to use an X gender marker on their driver's license.
Now, another aspect of transitioning are physical aspects. And this often starts with someone pursuing hormone therapy. And hormone therapy, for those taking testosterone, it'll kind of allow them to bulk up a bit and get a more masculine physique. And likewise, for those taking estrogen, it allows them to develop a bit of curve. So this is something that many people, trans and non-binary people, will try to pursue. But taking testosterone or estrogen also doesn't have the same effects for everybody. For example, taking testosterone for those desiring to appear more masculine, either trans men or non-binary people who feel a little more like they want to have a slightly more masculine gender expression, it usually allows them to it will usually drop their voice. So over time, they will develop a more masculine, deeper vocal register. And likewise, it often, again, over time, kind of like the same amount of time it would take a teen going through puberty, will allow many trans men to grow facial hair. And so it's highly likely that you could be speaking with a deep-voiced, full-bearded individual and never realize that you're talking to a trans man. I will tell you that that's what happened to me the first time, at least that I know of, that I met a trans man.
Conversely, for those individuals who are taking estrogen to have a more feminine gender expression, estrogen does not raise the register of our voice, and it only slows hair growth, especially in the beard area. And that's why many trans women elect to pursue a process known as electrolysis, which is a painstaking process of removing hair follicle by hair follicle, one at a time. And it takes over a year to do this, depending on, the stubble of an individual's beard. And it could be anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000, and this is typically not covered by insurance. So you could very well be speaking to an individual with a feminine gender expression with a deep vocal register. So please don't let that throw you off.
And that's why we said earlier in regards to gender expression that vocal register is a very key component of gender expression.
So other aspects of physical transitions are gender-affirming surgeries. So as you can see here on this slide, there's not just one surgery that an individual may elect to pursue. And just to give you some historical context of how this term has evolved over time, it first started years ago as, have you had the sex change? We had a lot of folks and today they still say, have you had the sex change? Well, that term then evolved to sex reassignment surgery, which stands for SRS, and then it evolved again to gender confirmation surgery, and now the most respectful way is gender affirmation surgery, with affirmation affirming who an individual has been all along.
And just to give you some idea of how many trans and non-binary people have pursued physical transitions, we want to share with you some statistics from the 2015 U.S. Trans Survey. This is the largest survey of the trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary community that's ever been done in the U.S. to date. Hopefully there's going to be a new one done this year. There were almost 28,000 respondents. That was back in 2015. And as you can see, about 80% of those respondents wanted to have hormone therapy, but only about half of them were actually able to obtain it. And then when it comes to the matter of gender-affirming surgeries, only 25%, so only 1 in 4 had had even one of those gender-affirming surgeries, which just goes to demonstrate what we have been saying all along, that being transgender is not about your physical anatomy, it's not about what surgeries you have or have not had, it's all about and only about your gender identity.
And because people are coming out as trans, non-binary, and gender nonconforming at very young ages, we want to spend just a few minutes talking about how you can understand what this experience looks like for a child or a youth individual, and what you can, how you can support this individual in this process. So we want to spend a few minutes talking about this.
And to kick that off, we want to share with you a brief video from the National Center for Transgender Equality that will introduce you to some trans and non-binary people, and also to a couple of trans children and their families.
My name is Rose. I'm a transgender girl. I was born a boy, but I always knew that I was a girl.
My name is Devon. I'm a trans male. That means I was born female, and I live now as a male. When I was 3, I decided that I was going to grow up and be a father and marry Janet Jackson.
She would write letters to Santa Claus, to the Tooth Fairy. When would I be turned into a girl? Could you turn me into a girl?
I'm Jay. I'm a non-binary trans person. That means that I'm not a man, nor am I a woman. I was raised as a girl, but when I learned about non-binary gender identities, it was like a whole new world had opened up for me.
My name is Ronnie, and my sister Ellie is transgender.
Ellie told us on her 4th birthday that she was a girl in her heart and her brain. And I said, "You're my favorite princess boy." And what did you say, Ellie?
No, I'm a princess girl.
My struggling point was this had to be a phase.
The reality is acceptance takes a while.
I was terrified of coming out. I was afraid of losing friends, family, loved ones. I was afraid of this discrimination and potential violence I could face.
I was so terrified that I wanted to die. Got threatening letters. One of the quotes said, do us a favor, Paula, and put that gun back up to your head and finish the job.
I'm scared as a dad for her safety, whether a society will be as accepting as her family and her friends are.
I feel embarrassed and unsafe when people out me to other people.
If there isn't a gender-neutral bathroom available, when there are only men's and women's bathrooms, I have to make a decision about how I look that day and whether there's more risk for me going into the men's room or the women's room.
I was chased by 4 people in the metro for being transgender.
I have been denied health care. I have been gawked at. I've been humiliated. I have been physically assaulted several times when using the bathroom.
Seeing her face the first time we let her wear a dress outside of the house, pretty special.
You're different, that's okay. Just keep on being yourself.
Support means listening, maybe not understanding, but just listening and being there for me.
Pushing back on jokes or offensive comments at the expense of transgender people.
The easiest way to support transgender people is to follow their lead.
Supporting transgender people means letting them be who they are.
I'm proud to be trans because I want to be myself.
I'm proud to be trans because I think life is too short to be anything besides what you are. This is who I am.
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 That video gets me every time.
Yeah. So the mental and medical health experts who have been working with gender diverse children and youth for the last several decades have come to recognize that there are a large group of kids who are what they call gender expansive or gender creative or gender explorative. You know, those are the words that are used now. Back when I was a kid, we were called tomboys, and unfortunately, little boys got labeled as sissies. But within that broad category of gender expansive children, there actually are transgender children, children whose gender identities just do not match the gender that they're being raised as. And as you heard in that video, they can know as young as 4 years old, 3 years old, even 2 years old, because that's when children are starting to recognize the difference between boys and girls, men and women. And so, of course, the question then becomes, how do you pick out the transgender kids from those who are just gender expansive? Well, the good news is that the answer lies in the question itself. How do you pick, P-I-C, out the transgender child? what these medical and mental health experts have determined is that transgender children are P, persistent, I, insistent, and C, consistent about their gender identities. It's not a phase. In fact, the American Psychological Association says that a child has, for at least for 6 months, they have to be presenting these indicators of being transgender. And so some of these indicators, these signs of insistency, have to do with things like these children don't just say, oh, it would be nice to be a boy, or I wish I was a girl. They say, I am a boy, or I am a girl.
And if we remember in that video we just watched, when Ellie's mom made the statement, you're my princess boy, Ellie said, no, I am your princess girl.
Likewise, they will be very insistent regarding their clothes. They really want to wear the clothes that match their gender identity, and especially the underwear and the bathing suits that match their gender identity. Likewise, when these children dream, when they engage in pretend play, they will dream and they will pretend that they are their true gender identity.
And remember how Devin responded in that video when he was approached, what do you want to be when you grow up? Devin saw himself in his true gender identity. He says, I want to grow up and be a father and marry Janet Jackson.
Yeah. Transgender children also want to engage in the activities and have the playmates that match their gender identities. And one of the biggest ways you know that you have a transgender child is because when they are allowed to begin to transition and allowed to live according to their true gender identity, parents report that their child begins to blossom. Prior to that, if children are not being allowed to live as their true gender identity, they may withdraw, get very quiet. Some have actually stopped talking. Or they might go the other direction and be acting out, and parents might be experiencing a lot of misbehavior. But once these children are allowed to transition, then they're happy children.
And one of the most moving parts in that video was Rose's mom making the comment, the first time we let Rose go outside wearing a dress, the look on her face was priceless, and that's what gets me every time.
Now, because medical and mental health experts have determined what the signs of being a transgender child are, they have also developed gender-affirming protocols to support these children in living their true gender identities. And these gender-affirming protocols, especially for young children, start with aspects of social transitions. So you'll remember that includes things like wearing your hair differently, dressing differently, using the bathroom that matches your gender identity, and being called by a name that you've chosen for yourself, and the pronouns that match who you know yourself to be. Now, all of these things that are part of a social transition, it takes a village, especially when supporting this child. So they need medical and they need a therapist, they'll need a doctor, teachers, coaches, and their faith community, their Sunday school teachers, right? You are all going to be part of that village that will need to support this child and their family. Then, as the child gets older and starts to approach puberty, they can go on a type of hormones that's called puberty blockers. And these hormones will actually will stop the child from going into their biological puberty that would have been determined by their anatomy. And this buys the family a couple more years to make sure that, yes, this is actually their true gender identity.
The puberty is not only a significant milestone for trans people, it's also a significant milestone for some gender-expansive individuals, because, again, puberty is when our sex-segregated characteristics No,
secondary sex.
Secondary sex characteristics, thank you, start showing up in us based on the sex that we were assigned at birth. So for some gender expansive individuals who hit that puberty and they start seeing these things appear and they start experiencing, feeling these things, they say, wait just a minute, this doesn't work for me. And that's when some gender expansive individuals transition.
And so one of the effects of puberty blockers can be seen there in this photograph. That is Nicole and Jonas Maines. They were identical twins, both assigned male at birth. As you can see, Nicole was actually a transgender girl. And so she was allowed to go on puberty blockers. And so what you're seeing here is that she has not developed the Adam's apple that her brother has developed. Likewise, where Jonas's jaw is getting that more square, chiseled, masculine look to it, Nicole's is still very rounded and feminine. Jonas is starting to get the peach fuzz, right? The little mustache growing there, where Nicole is not. Nicole's voice will not drop. And so she will continue to have a feminine vocal register. And likewise, she will not get as tall. And so going on to the puberty blockers just puts all those that puberty that Jonas is experiencing on hold, buys Nicole a little bit in her family, a little bit more time. And so then as she gets just a little bit older, if everybody's still on the same page and Nicole is still feeling like, yes, this is who I truly am, and the therapists and the doctors and parents and everybody's in agreement with that, then she'll go on cross-gender hormone therapy. And that will allow her to experience the puberty of her true gender identity.
Go ahead.
And being able to maintain that higher vocal register, being able to, not get quite as tall as her brother will. All these things are going to be extremely important to these children, to allow them to live as the people they know themselves to be. Now, I haven't mentioned the words reversible and irreversible. Social transitions and puberty blockers are totally reversible. That means if you were to stop them, then the child would, if you were to stop the puberty blockers, the child would go through the puberty that was determined by their biology. However, once they start the cross-gender hormone therapy, that does have some irreversible impacts because, like for a trans boy, it would drop, the cross-gender hormone therapy would drop their vocal register. It's very hard to raise that again. Also, it will affect their fertility. So most children at this point become infertile, and that can be a huge thing, especially for the parents, thinking, oh my gosh, I may not be able to have biological grandchildren. So there's lots of considerations to be made around cross-gender hormone therapy, and these things are all taken into consideration by the families who have transgender children.
So I wanted to stop here and dispel a myth that's out there. A lot of folks think that trans people are whimsically changing their gender. But as you can understand in just the few minutes that we've shared with you here, this is not an overnight process. This is years of conversations and meeting with therapists and meeting with medical doctors and talking to family, checking in with each other. So I hope that you can see in just the little bit that we've shared with you that this is a serious journey for an individual to take. But those individuals who do take it, they're not confused. This is who they are. So once an individual takes all these steps, then when they reach the legal age of 18, they can elect to pursue gender-affirming surgeries that work for them. And that's that last bullet.
So now we want to take any questions that you may have around transitioning, either for adults or for children and youth. And then when we'll break for a little bit after that, and then we will come back and talk about how you can create gender affirming congregations.
So questions around transition? Can I ask a question? Who in here has a gender diverse congregate in their congregation?
Or family member or friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully what you can see here, it's not if, it's when.
Right.
You know, we're going to be visible. We're going to continue to grow in our culture. And so we're hoping that, you know, by the hands that were raised, we understand, we're trusting that you all are leaning into this journey with them and their families and supporting them in any way that you can.
Because I'm not seeing any question. Yes, question there.
Repeat the question.
So the question regards fertility before having, can eggs be or sperm be saved? If the person is old enough, that can be successful. Sometimes if it's a teenager, then the sperm or the eggs haven't developed enough for that to be successful. That sort of science is still evolving and growing. So, for older individuals who have kind of gone through the puberty that was dictated by their biology, it's more likely that can happen. But again, that takes a lot of money to be able to do those things. But it's not as possible yet for teenagers, especially if they've been on the hormone
not
block.
teenagers, younger.
Yeah, younger people, especially if they've been on the hormone blockers, so they haven't gone into, because they wouldn't develop eggs, for example, if they've been on the hormone blockers.
Any other questions? Feel
Yes.
free.
We have a question online from one
Right.
of our guests. How, as a minister, can I support a person who is transitioning? Same question for the Unity community present.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to talk about after the break, all of those things, how to make our congregations trans-welcoming. Actually, to that specific question, how can I support an individual? We actually do another whole 2-hour training just on the pastoral care concerns and how you can provide pastoral care not only to these children, but to the family members, to the spouses, if it's an older, if it was to Gabrielle's spouse, right? To Gabrielle's adult children, to younger children of a person who's transitioning. That's another whole 2-hour training. So, but we will be talking about making your congregations trans-affirming. Why don't we go ahead and break now? And if you all could return in 15 minutes, so come back. I'm seeing 2:28 on the clock. If you could be in your seats and ready to go at 2:45.
Yep.
That would be wonderful. Our books are for sale. During the break, we won't be signing them. We'll wait until after the whole session to do that. But you can get them, and then you can be first in the signing line if you need to travel and go someplace quickly.
So 15 minutes, okay?
Well, the clock is saying 2:45, so if y'all could please wrap up your conversations and come back and take a seat. Based on the questions that we've been having around, how can we minister to folks, right? How can we support folks? We want to share with you a little bit of what parents of transitioning children experience. And we're going to do that through some excerpts from a YouTube channel that's done by a young trans man named Sam Collins. And in this particular episode, he had his mom on so she could share some of her experiences. So let's listen to what Sam and his mom have to share.
What's up, guys? I brought my mom here today because we wanted to discuss trans-related issues. A lot of people have been asking questions about parents, so I brought a parent.
Hi.
If you don't know, for some reason, I'm transgender. This is my mom, and she helped me through basically everything that has to do with that. But I want to tell you guys how I came out to her and how scary it was for me, and then you can get a parent's perspective on what it's like to understand.
So in the next clip, we're going to see what we've cut out is where Sam shares the 3 different times he tried to muster the courage and come out to his mom. And then finally, on the 3rd time, he actually did come out to her. So now we're going to hear her reaction.
Typically do.
I don't even know what I did after that time.
I think it took a long time for her to process it. It takes a long time usually for parents to process. I want to go to a gender therapist.
Yeah, so then Sam kept asking me, Mom, did you get me a therapist? And I'd be like, not yet. Like I kind of just pushed it off. I thought it would go away.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common reaction from a parent, denial, because they don't know what to do. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to ask for help because I didn't know anyone that was transgender. And to hear your own child come out and say that, it's scary. Like I felt as a parent, I was afraid. I was afraid for my son. I was afraid for me. I was afraid for my family. It's like I felt all alone. And I'm sure that's how Sam felt for years, but I didn't know that.
I feel like
About. And at first, I also want to say that, I've always worked full time, so I'd have to go into work and pretend everything's great at home. And meanwhile, I'm like tormented because I'm trying to help my kid to get school straightened out and the therapist and the doctors and changing everything, the name and everything. It's just so much work, and you have to go to work. And I was totally exhausted by the whole thing, and I didn't want him to see it, because I'm trying to be a strong woman and a mother for him, a single parent, and doing this by myself.
So we wanted to share those videos with you to give you the width, breadth, and depth of what a family member, especially a parent of a transitioning individual, goes through. And you heard all of these things on this slide that this mom was going through. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to speak to on this slide, and that is, for a lot of parents, even a lot of siblings, I know that this is certainly the case for my children. They have to go through this degree of guilt because in many ways, they're losing the person.
Grief process.
I'm sorry, grief process. They're going through this grief process because they're losing this person that they thought that they knew, and this person is evolving, and so having to grieve over that loss. A lot of folks say it's like a death, a death in the family because you are transitioning, as well as the individual who is transitioning. The parents are transitioning alongside this individual. So there's a grief process that you have to go through, or a lot of parents have to go through. Some parents also experience a degree of guilt because, as you heard in this video, Sam's mom said, I was just hoping that it was a phase. I'm hoping that it goes away. And turns out that it didn't, right? So consequently, a lot of parents who see their child go through many different phases of exhilaration and depression, and then all of a sudden when they're allowed to transition, waiting so long to actually get on board with their child's transition, kind of puts them in a place of experiencing guilt around waiting so long. So we share this information with you so that you'll understand what your families of gender diverse people in your congregation, in your spiritual communities, are going through and what they're processing and how you can support them along the way.
And one of the things you heard that Sam's mom say was that she needed resources. She didn't know anything about this. So again, we encourage you, if you have a congregant like this, send them to our website, because we do have a whole section on transgender children and youth, and many of these organizations that are listed there are linked off from that, so they can start getting some basic information there. Something else that you can also do to support your families is, if you have a youth group program, and if your youth group occasionally has sleepovers or lock-ins, make sure that you are being proactive about developing your youth group sleepover policy. If you have a trans girl and a trans boy, typically on these youth group outings, they get segregated. The boys sleep here, the girls sleep there. Where are your trans children? Where are your non-binary children going to be sleeping? And the time to be discussing this is not once you have a trans child or a non-binary child, the time in your congregation. It's now. Make sure these policies get put in place right away. And again, that's the sort of thing that's kind of beyond a basic introductory 2-hour class, 2-hour session, but it's the sort of things we talk about in the pastoral care issues.
So now that you understand a little bit of the dynamics of what this looks like for your congregation, we want to help you understand what can you do to set yourself up, as we say in our business, the congregation of choice, right? How can you create that welcoming congregation for this demographic?
So there's basically 4 things that you're going to need to do. First of all, and we're going to break each of these down in a minute, but in general, you're going to want to educate everyone in your congregation about gender diverse people. Because a lot of times we find that people want to be respectful, they want to be supportive, especially in our unity congregations, but sometimes they simply don't know how, because culturally, historically speaking, this is new for many of us. So educating everyone is really important. The second thing is you're going to want to teach everybody how the Bible supports and how the materials from your own faith tradition, like we were doing an interfaith service, we talk about how do your sacred texts support gender diversity. A third thing that you'll need to do is to proactively reach out to people, because many trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people have been very hurt by churches and by congregations. So they may not just come wandering in unless somehow you let them know that they're going to be welcome in your space. So we're going to talk a bit about that. And then, of course, once they do come through your doors, we're going to talk about what you can do to create a welcoming environment for them and their families. So, starting off with the education piece, one thing we recommend, one way you can start educating, especially your leaders, is to take just 5 or 10 minutes out of your meetings, and we know you all have a lot of meetings, and show some of the brief video clips that are linked off from our resources page. They're very educational, and then have just 5 minutes of discussion around it. If you could do that like every month or every couple of months, that starts to grow people's knowledge and understanding.
Another thing you can do to educate is host guest speakers, much like Unity Atlanta is doing here today. And Reverend Jen, thank you so much for providing a sacred space and safe space for this conversation to happen today. You also can host a movie night at your spiritual community. The spiritual community that Lynn and I belong to recently had a movie night where they featured The Danish Girl. And after that movie, Lynn and I spent about 30 minutes after the movie answering any questions that the group had. So this is a great way to increase the awareness and create those safe spaces for conversations.
We also strongly recommend the video Transfigurations. It's a one-person show created and performed by Peterson Toscano, who is an amazing actor, writer, and biblical scholar. And in it, he acts out some of the gender-diverse characters that are present in Scripture.
And how many of you knew that there were gender-diverse characters in Scripture? There you go.
Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing performance, and he comments on it, and it's very entertaining and educational. It's just awesome. And that leads us into, and that's a great thing, not only for educating everyone, but also for the second step we recommend, which is teaching everyone how the Bible supports gender-diverse people. So using Peterson's video is a great way to do that. Also, using my book. I know that spiritual leaders are busy people, so I have included a discussion guide in the back of that is like, you can use it as either a 4-week or a 5-week book group study or Bible study, and that can be helpful to your congregation.
So as you educate your community, you're going to want to proactively reach out for the reasons that Linda already shared with you. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. The reason that we spent so much time on the front end about the language is to make sure that you understand how to use that language. So if you have a newsletter in your spiritual community, or you have a marquee, or however you put the message of your community out to your community, use the language that's relevant to our personal experience. Use the terms gender identity and gender expression in your marketing material. It's not enough these days to say you are an open, affirming, or an LGBTQ welcoming congregation, because oftentimes TGNC MB individuals show up within two spiritual communities, and what spiritual communities really mean is they understand how to be inclusive for LGB folks, okay? So using the terms that are relevant to our experience is going to be an immediate message to a gender diverse person like me saying, okay, they're using the language that resonates with me. I feel like I can show up and feel safe and belong in this space. Also, host community-wide educational events. This is a great way to build a relationship with organizations that are trans-led within your community. And again, when the community, the TGNC MB community, sees that you're hosting these events, they're going to stand up and take notice, and they're going to say, this is a place where I can show up.
Another way that you can proactively reach out is by providing meeting space, perhaps free meeting space, for non-binary and trans-related groups. There's many organizations, like there may be a local community trans and non-binary support group, or a PFLAG organization. You can learn what that is if you're not sure on the children's part of the resources page. Anyways, providing meeting spaces for these groups, because as you know, once a person has been in your building once and found their way to it, they're much more likely to come back again.
And as you proactively reach out, making sure that you're creating a welcoming environment when they do start coming through your doors. And the first thing that you can do is understand how to navigate this conversation around pronouns. Today, I just want to let you know, you can never make an assumption about a person's pronouns by looking at their gender expression, their vocal register, even their name, right? So how do we navigate this conversation around pronouns in a respectful way? Well, we share a very simple technique with our audiences, and it goes something like this. You simply introduce yourself. You say, hi, my name is Gabrielle, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. How about you? What the how about you does is it sends a message to the person that you're communicating with that, one, you understand the importance of pronouns and that you want to connect with them in a respectful way, and two, that you're not placing the burden on them to educate you on the importance of pronouns.
Now, I have to confess, the very first time I did this, it felt rather awkward. because, for all of us as humans, the first time we do anything, it can be a little uncomfortable. So to help you get over that discomfort, in case you've not done this before, we'd like you to turn to someone who is close by and introduce yourself this way. Remember, you're going to give your name, your pronouns, and then say, "How about you?" You could do that quickly, please. My mic is on, so I'm going to let you talk. So I'll let you talk. Mm-hmm.
Feel good? Great. Good to hear that.
Okay.
It felt different. That's okay too.
Yeah. Well, we also want you to know that once you ask someone their pronouns, along with hearing the usual she and he, the person might also say, "My pronouns are they, them, and theirs." As we heard a little bit earlier, that somebody's non-binary 9-year-old uses they, them, and theirs pronouns. In fact, this is becoming increasingly common among non-binary people, so much so that the rules of grammar actually have changed in response to this common usage of they, them, and theirs. So it is now considered grammatically correct to use they, them, and theirs as singular personal pronouns.
So here's the thing. How comfortable are you using they, them, and their pronouns? Probably not, because, I can tell you that Linda and I have had to work on this, right? So if you're uncomfortable using they, them, and theirs, partner up with a close friend or colleague and say, "Hey, I want to practice with you to use they, them, and theirs," and create a scenario where you're talking about an individual and swap their pronouns. If they use he or she, swap and use they, them, and theirs. Practice. It's about rewiring our brain to use they, them, and theirs.
And we're not going to do that right now for the sake of time, but it is a good way to help you get more comfortable using they, them, and their pronouns. Now, another thing that the person might say when you ask them their pronouns is, "Please don't use any pronouns from me. You can just use my name." And that can be even more challenging and harder to get used to, but that's what feels right to some people. Also, we want you to be aware that there is a new gender-neutral title emerging. Along with Mr., Ms., Mrs., you may start seeing MX, the last word there on the screen, pronounced 3 different ways, either MX, mix, or mux.
We often get asked the question, Gabrielle and Linda, what if we make a mistake with pronouns? Well, the question is not if, it's when. Because the reality is, we're going to all make mistakes, right? I mean, my goodness, Linda and I occasionally make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, you simply apologize. You don't make a big deal about it, and you keep moving forward. As trans people, we understand when someone innocently mispronouns or misgenders us in the spirit of learning to do better, as opposed to when someone does it deliberately and consistently and persistently. Now, if that happens, then we have to have a whole nother conversation, okay? But we understand when someone is in the spirit, in the process of learning new pronouns.
And there are many different places where you can use your pronouns, and we strongly recommend that you use them in all these places, because this using your pronouns is a great way, again, to let gender diverse people know that, hey, you're wanting to connect with them, you're wanting to be inclusive of them. So put them in your personal and your professional email signatures as noted there. Include them on your name tags in your congregations, in your introductions, as we've just shared, and definitely on your website. Most of you have a page where it shows your staff. Make sure, along with the name, that that person's pronouns are beside it, because as you know, many people find a congregation through their website. And so if a gender diverse person or someone who has a gender diverse family member is on your website, they see pronouns beside your staff's name, they're going to say, oh, okay, these people get it.
It's important to also understand, as cisgender allies of the TGNC-MB community, we need you advocating for us on pronouns. We have a colleague who is a cisgender ally, and he attended one of our trainings a couple years ago, and he started adding his pronouns to his email signature. And it created an educational moment with everyone that he was communicating with, okay? So this is a great way to advocate for our existence and our visibility.
And as Gabrielle said, a great way to create and continue the education in your congregation.
So another thing that we can do to create welcoming environments is know the words to use and not to use. And the first thing is understanding that questions about anatomy or surgeries are totally off limits, okay? I mean, my goodness, you're not walking up to any of your other congregants saying, what kind of surgeries have you had, right? So you're not going to walk up to a trans person and say, what kind of surgeries have you had, or what is your anatomy? And you may be thinking, Gabrielle, duh, we're not going to do that. You'll be shocked. Ask her.
Yeah.
How many times people have asked me and trans friends of mine, what is your anatomy? Okay, remember, being trans is not about this, not about anatomy or surgeries. It's about and only about one's gender identity.
And our friend has already spoken very eloquently to the importance of broadening our understanding of language and making sure that we're using more gender neutral language. Back in the 80s, when I was in seminary, I was in the part of the front for the move to gender inclusive language. That's when we started saying mother, father, God, and you know, we didn't have, it wasn't the chairman of the board anymore, it was the chairperson and all that. Well, now it's time to take another step and to recognize that gender is not just binary, it's not just men and women, it's also non-binary people. And so if you say something like, you know, brothers and sisters in Christ, we're so glad you're here this morning, who did you just leave out? All the non-binary people, or those people who have non-binary family members, aren't going to feel quite so seen and heard. So this is going to take a lot of thinking and a lot of action on our part. But phrases like, you know, it's so, you know, members of the beloved community, it's so good to see you all, or something like that, something that's more gender neutral. Start thinking in those terms. Also, be very careful about, you don't ever want to dead name someone. Dead naming is using a person's pre-transition name. So even if you were talking about something somebody did or an award they won or something they achieved pre-transition, again, always use their current name and current pronouns to avoid dead naming them.
Other terms to avoid are lifestyle, choice, and preference. You know, as a transgender woman, I did not choose to live the lifestyle of a transgender woman or do I prefer to live the lifestyle of a transgender woman or a transgender lifestyle any more so than a cisgender individual chooses to live a cisgender lifestyle. As we heard in that video, this is who we are. We are transgender people. You may occasionally come across the older, more outdated term transgenderism. But it's important to know we are not a philosophy, nor are we a movement. We are transgender people. We are the transgender community. And then this last bullet, you know, just as recent as a year ago, it was actually respectful to ask someone what your preferred pronouns are. But as the community has had time to sit with this, remember what I said about the word preference. Preference or preferred implies that pronouns are a choice. Well, guess what? My pronouns are my pronouns. They are not a choice any more so than your pronouns are your pronouns. So what you would say is, what are your pronouns, or what pronouns do you use?
And then we've included here another list of either outdated or just downright disrespectful terms to avoid and words that can be used in their place. And the one I want to highlight is that second one, You wouldn't say that someone was born a man or born a woman. The more respectful way to say that is that they were assigned female at birth or that they were assigned male at birth.
So now that we've shared with you a few things that you can do to create affirming environments, we want to give you an opportunity to practice what you've learned, hopefully. So what we've done here on the screen is we have written 6 sentences in not the most respectful way. We want to give you an opportunity to rewrite these sentences based on what you've learned in a more respectful way, understanding that there may not be just one correct answer. So what we're going to do is we want to divide the room right here. So this half of the room, you're going to take the first 3 sentences, this half of the room, the bottom 3 sentences. And for those joining online, feel free to enter your comment or answer in the chat box, and we'll track those as well. So y'all take a couple minutes to do that.
And you're welcome to, if you
collaborate with your
if you want to
neighbor.
pair up with somebody
Yeah.
to discuss it and make sure you're, kind of running ideas by each other, you're welcome to do that here in the room.
Who would like to take the first sentence?
But I think we assigned that to this side of the room, did
This
we?
side of the room over here. Anybody want to take a stab? This is a safe space, okay? It's learning a new language.
This is the space to make mistakes, okay?
Yeah.
All right. So how might you say that?
Okay, remember the term, the most respectful way to use the term about surgeries. What was the most respectful term? Gender affirmation, right? So Priya had gender affation surgery, right?
Yeah,
Gender affirmation surgery,
surgeries.
right?
This may not sound
Linda.
pleasant,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but I remember it is because it's changed so much. The acronym is GAS. GAS. The person had gas. Anyways, it helps me to remember it. That's all I'm saying.
So another way you can answer this question is, it's none of your business,
Yeah, that's a perfect way
right?
to do it.
Why are we having this conversation?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, second sentence. Again, this side of the room, or has anybody chimed in from online in regards to that second sentence?
Not so far.
Okay. Anybody?
What?
Oscar is what? Oscar is a man?
Oscar is a man?
What would be another respectful way? That's perfect. Oscar is a man. Oscar is a trans man.
Yep. Perfect.
It's just that transgendered. You don't want to use it as an adverb.
Great.
Good
How
job.
about the third sentence? Keisha is a real woman. Keisha is a woman, right? How about if you wanted to use the more respectful way of saying real woman? How would you say that? She's a cisgender woman, or she is a transgender woman. A transgender woman is a woman.
Is also a real woman. Yeah. Okay.
How about
This side of the room now.
Okay, hold a minute. Are we still on this question?
I don't know.
Yeah, we're
I'm
still
not.
on this. How about?
Apparently.
Okay, all right. We're moving on.
Okay.
How about we want to be respectful of transgenders, this side of the room? Transgender people?
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
What else?
There you go.
But if you wanted to specifically reference transgender people, what would be another way? We want to be respectful of transgender people. We want to be respectful of the trans community. And was that what was said over here too? Very good. Great. Yeah. That would be another option. Wonderful.
What about Daniel was born a woman?
Go ahead. That's right.
Right. Signed female at birth.
Good.
Good job.
Yeah. All right. And, okay, now we didn't go over this one, so we're going to see how you can transfer your knowledge now. It's one of the things I learned in education, okay? Taylor is a non-binary. Instead, you would say...
A non-binary person. Yes.
Okay. And also you could say... What? Identifies as non-binary. And also Taylor is non-binary. So all of those, again, you don't want to use it as a noun. You want to use the word as an adjective to describe the person. Good job, y'all.
Very good, very good.
Right.
Thank y'all for leaning in with us on that.
Yeah, honestly, if you can get the language right, you've done a lot. You know, you really have. All right, another aspect of offering a welcoming environment is to make sure you're including trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people in your sermon and teaching illustrations, all right? So that people hear about themselves, see about themselves, know that they're recognized. And if you're thinking, well, you know, I don't know a lot of stories about trans or non-binary people. One news source that I have found helpful, because you only get something from them once a week, is the news source Them. And it has a lot of stories about trans and non-binary individuals and things happening in the community. So that could be a news source you might want to sign up for.
And as Linda's business partner, I also want to give a shout out to her book, because she has a couple of sermons in her book that you could use to highlight teaching illustrations where TGNC-MB folks can feel a part of that.
We also want to let you know that each month we do put out a newsletter which includes a link to the blog we've written for that month, which will have information about trans and non-binary people. And you can sign up for our newsletter at the table where we'll be signing books after, and also on the table to your left as you go out, you'll see that there's sign-up sheets there. And our cards are beside of it also.
So another thing that you can do to offer welcoming environments is making sure that you're providing opportunities for positions in leadership and service. As you heard in my personal story, me being afforded the opportunity to bring my gifts of ministry to that spiritual community was very important for me, because not only was I showing up authentically, but I was able to serve and lead as my authentic self. And think about what this does. If you have a gender diverse individual in leadership or in service, when you have a gender diverse visitor walk through your door and they see someone like themselves in that position, they're going to immediately know this is a place for me to belong, to come in and belong and to get involved with. Okay, so this is a great way to do this. I was going to say something there, but I can't remember. We'll keep moving.
Another thing you can do to create a welcoming space is to make sure that you're providing at least some all-gender or gender-neutral restroom options. We strongly recommend that if you have any single-use restrooms in your building, that you make them gender-neutral or all-gender. We'll show you a sign you can put beside of them in a moment. But this is helpful not only for non-binary people like Jay, whom you heard in the video, said, you know, if there's not a gender-neutral restroom option, I really have to think hard about, okay, where am I going to be safest? Where am I going to feel most comfortable that day based on their gender expression that day? But it's also helpful for other people in your congregation too, for anyone who might have a caregiver who is of a different gender.
So what you're going to want to educate your greeters and ushers to do is when a gender diverse individual walks in and they ask, where is your restroom? You're going to want to educate them to, this is over in this direction are our restrooms. It's important not to single out, you need to be using this restroom. And a great way that you can navigate this is making sure that you have temporary signage at your sex-segregated restroom locations indicating where your gender inclusive or all gender restroom is available. And this is especially important if you have a single-use restroom. This is an easy fix. You make that single stall restroom your gender inclusive or your all gender restroom. So another thing that you can do to create a welcoming environment is engage in conversations. And I'm so grateful that each of you have felt comfortable coming up to me and approaching me and having a conversation. Because guess what? I am so much more than just being trans, right? In fact, if you sit down across the table from me, you're going to find out that we have so much more in common than not, right? So feel comfortable engaging with your gender diverse congregants because that is a huge way and an immediate and very low-hanging fruit way of making them feel like they're comfortable and that they belong in your space.
And remember from Gabrielle's story, you don't have to have a whole hour-long conversation with the person. For Gabrielle, just the pastor coming up at the end of the service and saying, hey, hi, what's your name? Glad you were here. Please come back. That made such a difference for her and was so affirming.
So we wanted to stop here and see if there are any questions about creating welcoming environments for gender diverse folks. And if we haven't covered anything, we would love to hear some feedback from you all because you have gender diverse folks already showing up in your congregations. What are some of the things that you've done in order to help the group here? Chris, we've got a comment online.
Cassidy from Unity Minneapolis asks, curious if Unity or any of our regional directors have a robust inclusive policy around the youth overnights that we could use as a model, in reference to your earlier comments.
About the
No,
overnight.
I have no idea. Do any of you Unity folks in the congregation know if that has... There is protocol for regional activities. So where would a person reach out to they? I would talk to Watana Finnegan. Okay. And they're in the regional office? Okay. Okay, the youth and family ministry consultant for the region. Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you for that question online.
Yes.
Any
other
other
questions
questions or
online or in
comments?
the room?
Yeah.
Yeah, come to the mic. That would be great.
So, Gabrielle, I have a question, and if this is not an appropriate question, please educate me.
Okay.
Okay. So, we do have some gender diverse people in our congregation.
Right.
And so, is it appropriate to recognize that they're gender diverse, or is it appropriate to just recognize them how they show up? Like if somebody, do you want people to know that you're a trans woman, or do you just want people to know you're a woman? You see my question? Do we recognize it, or do we not recognize it?
That's a great question, Pam. And I wanted to invite y'all to think back to that video that we shared with you, the NCTE video, because one of the questions was, how can we best support you? And if you remember, Grace, the trans woman of color, when she was asked that question, she said, the best way to support me is to follow my lead, okay? And a lot of times, following an individual lead is not calling them out. In fact, we strongly suggest that you avoid outing someone in your congregation because they may not feel comfortable being outed. If someone chooses to share with you about and confide in you about their gender identity, that is information for them to share and for you to hold in confidence. Now, if an individual transitions in your congregation, that's a different story, right? But if someone comes in gender diverse and they've already transitioned and, they just want to be received for who they know themselves to be, right? If they want to put that information out there to the community, again, that's for them to share and for the community to hold in confidence. Does that make sense? Great question, Pam. Thank you for that. You want to add anything to that?
Nope.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Any other things that you'd like to share with the group that you are doing in your community that could be helpful for those here in the room? Yes.
Yeah, come on up to the mic.
Okay, as we're promoting our openness to all genders or whatever, I'm concerned about conveying the message that we are only open to trans gender people or whatever, and it's like, especially when we're doing online services.
Right.
And there's people who are just curious about who we are. And I don't want, I think there might be a tendency for some people to see us, oh, they're just a gay community or whatever.
Right.
So how can you speak to that?
Okay, so this is what I would do. In your communications, you want to make sure that you are, we do a lot of work in the corporate space, right? And a lot of corporations are putting together their diversity statement, all right? So when you, as a spiritual community, are communicating to your congregates who is welcome in the space, like we said earlier, it's not enough to say LGBTQ. It's more important to start using the language that resonates with all of us. So you can use terms like, regardless of your gender identity, your sexual orientation,
Gender expression.
Gender expression, age, ethnicity,
Abilities.
Use abilities, right. Use those terms to encapsulate all individuals who may be showing up in your community. And that way you're not singling out TGNC NB folks. You're including them, but you're including them in a way that they will recognize immediately that this is a safe space for me, okay? Now, do you do this without education? Absolutely not, because if people don't know what they don't know, then you're going to have to help them understand those terms, like we've shared with you today, right? That's why conversations, creating safe spaces for education is very important for your leadership, especially within your community, right? So it's not just a one thing you can do. There's multiple things that you have to do in order to inform your entire community about why we're doing this, right? Great question. I will also tell you another thing that you can do, and that is images are very important for TGNC NB folks. Images, what I mean by that. We got a pride flag in the back of the room, right? Just because I walk in, now while I walk in and I love seeing the pride flag, right? Another step that can be taken is you can have a trans flag or a non-binary flag here, okay?
Or a more inclusive pride flag.
Or a more inclusive pride flag,
yeah.
right? There are other pride flags. The pride flag has evolved over time, right? So making sure that, again, in your messaging, in your website, showing images that resonate with our personal experience go a long way in saying, okay, I know that, they're not going to be showing colors of the trans flag or the non-binary flag or the more inclusive pride flag unless they understand why they're doing that, right? So that's another thing that you can do as a spiritual community. Any other comments, questions?
Gabrielle, do we have your permission to copy this?
Yeah.
This and hand it out to our people to help educate?
Absolutely. that is a free resource. Absolutely.
And you will be getting it is 3:30, so we want to be respectful of your time. You will be getting, for everybody who registered, we assume that somebody has an email list of people who registered, so we will get a copy of the slide deck or PDF of the slide deck to that person so that they can send it out to everybody who registered for this continuing education event. And meanwhile, thank you so much we do want to just remind you that you can go to the resources page on our website, and you can find just tons more information there. But we've tried to keep it so it's not too overwhelming.
We have one last video to leave with you, okay? This is a short video where I was talking to someone. I was talking to someone in the back of the room. Just give me a minute.
Okay.
Someone in the back of the room, and the first time that they had exposure to a non-binary individual was Asia Kate Dillon of Billions. Anybody seen the show Billions?
I love that show. Yes.
Okay.
Taylor.
Yeah. So we're going to show you just a few minutes of the. Can we? A few minutes of this.
3 minutes. It's a 3 minute.
Okay. So if we need to stop, I tell you what.
It's on our website. It's on the resources page. Go to info about being trans or non-binary.
Hi, welcome. It's very nice to meet you.
Sorry.
And you will find this. You will find that video linked off from there. But I think we're going to have some music to play us out. Our books are available. We'll be happy to sign them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's have a big hand for Reverend Linda and Gabrielle. Thank you so much for being with us today. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Reverend Jen, did you want to say anything?
We're so grateful to Gabrielle and Linda for helping us learn new language that helps us continue to know the Christ presence and that divine expression of God that is within each and every one. We're grateful to Reverend Charlene for calling us to expand our consciousness about our ethics and how we show up in our leadership as spiritual leaders. And we're so grateful to be together in this building, and for all of you who've been tuning in with us. We know from this experience, this is the very first hybrid UMMAS leadership we've done, but we know that we are adaptable, we can change, and we can transform. And so we're grateful for each and every one who's participated in that with us. So before we head out for the rest of our day, Dale's going to bring us out with a song and a prayer.
So if you would, let's turn within once more. I invite you to take a deep breath and maybe just roll your shoulders around a little bit, or even stand up and move around a little bit. We've been sitting a lot today. I did a workshop with Linda Martella-Whitsett this week, and she talked about how movement is a prayer. We don't want to leave our body out. We are body, mind, heart, soul. We're all those things. So a lot of times before I pray, I just roll my shoulders and neck around, and then I take a deep, full breath and turn within and just feel the aliveness in our bodies. And feel our every cell respond to this touch of life that is the presence of God. God is everywhere present all the time. God is the space between your thoughts, between the beat of our heart. God is the space in every atom of our body. God is the space in this room right now that has supported us through today and yesterday evening. And God is the space inside your car as you drive away today. God is the sky and the sun that surrounds you when you walk outside the building. And this God is good and life and love and power and beauty and truth. It's what we are. And it's always with us all the time. So as we go from here today, we take with us an expanded awareness of this presence. We've been expanded today. Our mind is open. Our hearts are full and wide open. And we are grateful. And so we release our prayer into the law. We speak our word, knowing that it returns to us, multiplied exponentially. For this is the law, and it is so, and so it is. Amen. So, as you go out, you might consider leaving a love offering for UMMAS or for Unity of Savannah. There are... if you want to make a check to my church, you can, but I meant Unity Atlanta. There's 2 baskets on the table as you go out. Or you could just put my name on the check, too, if you felt like it. We're just open and ready to receive. You can pick somebody out in here and write them a check. Just give. The universe doesn't care, right? So I got another song, and God bless you. Have a safe drive home. This love that I had, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I had, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I had, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. This peace that I have, the world didn't give it to me. I said this peace that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This peace that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. I said the world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Thank you.